For more news with a Catholic perspective, visit EWTNnews.com. I'm Teresa Tomeo, and Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders starts now.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
Why do Catholics worship Mary?
What's stopping you?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest? Where is purgatory in the Bible?
What's stopping you?
I think the Pope has too much authority.
What's stopping you? You are called to communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Hey everybody, welcome again to Call to Communion. This is the program for our non-Catholic brothers and sisters. Are you yourself, you who are watching, you who are listening, are you a non-Catholic? Maybe you were a practicing Catholic many years ago, but gave it up for whatever reason. Maybe you've never been a Catholic. In any event, you probably have some questions about the Catholic faith. So here's what we recommend. Give us a call at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. If you're listening outside of the U.S. and Canada, please dial the U.S. country code and then 205-271-2985. You can also text the letters EWTN to 55000. Wait for our response and then text us your first name and your brief question. Message and data rates may apply. And for those of you watching us today on TV, you can participate as well. Our email address, ctc@ewtn.com. ctc@ewtn.com. Charles Beery is our producer. We have Ryan Penny standing by the phones, and Jeff Burson is on social media. He can pass on any questions that you might want to pose via YouTube or Facebook Live, because we're streaming there right now. I'm Tom Price, at least 12 feet away from Dr. David Anders.
Hey, Tom, how are you today?
Doing very well. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing all right, thank you.
Glad to hear that. We're going to lead off today with a text as we're getting some of these calls screened. Here's a text from Bob. When did God establish sacrifice as the basis of worship? After all, Cain and Abel made offerings without any prior mention of sacrifice in Genesis.
Thank you. So the doctrine that we ought to offer sacrifice to God is of the natural law, right? So it's something, the natural law is the human being's rational participation in the eternal law, right?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Meaning that there's an intelligibility, a pattern, a reason behind the nature of the human person, our biology, our physiology, as well as the operation of our rational intellect. I mean, these things are the kind of things that neuroscientists and psychologists study. The human person is one way, not another. And certain things are good for a human person, right?
Right.
It's good to eat your veggies.
Definitely.
That's a biological good. But there are moral goods that function the very same way. They're things that accord with our spiritual nature. They're not just laws that God arbitrarily wrote and dropped down on a parchment. They're actually written into the very fabric of our nature, just like our biological needs are encoded into our DNA. We have certain spiritual and moral needs that are encoded into our nature as spiritual persons. One of those is the need. It is good for us to worship God. Now, why would that be? Well, God is the greatest good. God's the greatest good. He's the first cause, the final end, and the source and origin of everything that's good. And in Him we live and move and have our being, and we depend on Him at every moment. And He is intrinsically praiseworthy. And so it's good for you to orient your life around a praiseworthy object, and the more worthy the object, the better it is for you.
Sure.
So the highest good is your highest happiness. And the inclination to recognize that and to put other things aside in preference to that highest good. And that's really what sacrifice is, right? It's giving up of something of value in preference for something of greater value. That's actually encoded into our DNA, if you will. And that's why we find sacrifice as a part of religious practice in every culture, at every time, and throughout the world. Even people who haven't heard anything about Christianity or Judaism practice rites of sacrifice of one kind or another. And even those who make a god, if you will, out of their physical fitness hold to the mantra, no pain, no gain.
Sure.
Right? They sacrifice their comfort now for, like bigger muscles tomorrow or something. But the notion of delayed gratification in the pursuit of a greater good is written into our very nature. It's of the natural law.
All right. Bob, thank you so much for your text. Here's one now from Andrew watching us on YouTube. Andrew says, considering so many biblical patriarchs were polygamists, what Bible verse prefers monogamy over polygamy?
Thanks. So starting with the teaching of Jesus, of course, is very clear. Now we begin to see a movement in that direction in the Old Testament. So you look at the book of Tobit, for example, is a beautiful testament, the Old Testament, to the value of loving monogamous marriage. But of course, Christ really puts it on the map when he says that the pattern for marital relationships should be patterned after the creation ordinance, when God made one man, one woman for one another for the raising up of children. And he says, the Jews had other practices, but he says, God permitted these because of your hardness of heart. This was a concession to human weakness. But it should not be so with you, he says. Right? But as God made in the beginning, what God has joined together, let man not separate. One man, one woman for life. And so the apostles, of course, taught that message. And that's the pattern for all marriage after the created order, but especially for Christians.
Very good. Andrew, thanks for watching us on YouTube. A quick email here from Gerard. What is the benefit of receiving the Eucharist on the tongue, and what is the spiritual benefit of praying in Latin?
Okay, thanks. So no physical posture or practice is in itself magically or intrinsically efficacious for our salvation. So however you receive communion, whatever mode of reception you practice, the communion will be of no value to you if you receive it without faith, charity, and contrition. All right, and so its subjective efficacy in you depends on those spiritual dispositions more than it depends upon the outward mode of your behavior. Now, the Church has always prescribed certain outward modes of behavior in the liturgy, both for priests and the lay faithful, in an effort to encourage those dispositions, right? And so that's the value in any sort of liturgical posture that you take. The purpose is to encourage you with the right disposition of heart so that you can fruitfully receive the Lord. But if you depend on the posture itself in a kind of quasi-magical way, well, that would be an act of superstition.
All right. And Gerard, thank you so much for your email. In a moment, we'll get to the phones. If you have a question for Dr. David Anders, do give us a call at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986 for Call to Communion. Stay with us.
Hello, family. Our world has been turned upside down by the coronavirus pandemic. Concern for our loved ones, economic uncertainty, and of course, social distancing. It's easy to understand why there's such great anxiety and fear in the world. I'm convinced that God is using this moment to bring us closer to Him and to strip away the distractions of our normal daily lives, and that He is calling us to place our trust in Him. In this difficult moment, EWTN is a great spiritual resource that can help you, your family, and friends make sense of the chaos. Of course, EWTN is where you can turn for Mass every day. In addition to our television and radio channels, you can also find the Mass, live Eucharistic adoration, the Rosary, and other devotions on our web and video on-demand platforms. And of course, EWTN News will continue to provide you with the latest updates on the pandemic, as well as other current events around the world from a Catholic perspective. Please know that we're praying for you, and let's also join together in prayer for our EWTN family around the world. Thank you, and may God bless you.
He was a doctor of the Church, a Carmelite, and one of the most famous mystics of all time.
Matthew Bunson and the Doctors of the Church.
St. John of the Cross wanted to help all Christians to become saints. One of his most important teachings was to encourage us all to learn how to love. "For there is no love," he said, "put love, and you will find love." He died in 1591.
For more about the Doctors of the Church, visit doctorsofthechurch.com.
Thanks for joining us here on Call to Communion on EWTN. Our phone number 833-288-EWTN. 288-EWTN if you have a question for Dr. David Anders. Anything at all regarding the Catholic faith. Why does the church teach this, but they don't teach this thing over here? 833-288-EWTN is our phone number, or you can text the letters EWTN to 55000. An email here from Rosa who says, would you please explain for my Protestant husband that the Roman Catholics are not the same people who crucified Jesus?
That's a bizarre claim.
Never heard that one.
Yeah, so I guess to explain that the Roman Catholics are not the ones that crucified Jesus, I would like to know why he thinks they are.
Yeah.
Right? Because technically speaking, we date the birth of the church to the outpouring of the Spirit at Pentecost. So, obviously Christ had begun to gather his community of elect, of followers, the disciples, the 12 and the 72 and the other sort of hangers-on with Christ's ministry. And but most of them ran away when Christ was arrested by the Romans in the Garden of Gethsemane. Only, Peter followed at a distance, and then when they asked him about it, he ran away.
I know.
And you had the Blessed Virgin and the other Mary, and you had St. John at the foot of the cross, but everybody else was gone. It was the Romans who arrested him, and the Sanhedrin, with the chief priest also as well. They took him to the temple before the chief priests that said he was worthy of death, and they took him to Pilate and said, you need to crucify him. But the church, such as it existed sort of in anticipation in the apostolic band, had disbanded. Mm-hmm. So they weren't there.
Really, it is a matter of historical record.
It's a matter of historical record, right? Exactly.
All right. Well, Rosa, thank you so much for your email. We hope that's helpful for you. Here's a text that just came in. This is from, let's see here, Dan, who's actually watching us right now on YouTube. He says, why do most Bibles translate Luke 1:28 as Hail, favored one, instead of Hail, full of grace? Isn't this what the dogma of the Immaculate Conception rests upon? What do you think?
Sure, thanks. So I do think that Bible translators today probably want to avoid language that they associate with the Catholic devotional tradition. And because they have a prejudice or a bias against it. Mm-hmm. And because Catholics have made this salutation central to our veneration of the Mother of God, Hail, full of grace, they don't want to be associated with that. So I think it's a kind of prejudicial sort of thing, right?
Okay.
And the Greek word kakeratomene is a middle or passive participle that means one having been graced to the full. So you do the math, as they say.
Yes, indeed. All right, Dan, thanks for watching us today on YouTube. Our phone number at EWTN's Call to Communion, 833-288-EWTN. If you have a question for Dr. David Anders, 833-288-3986. Call to Communion in progress here on EWTN. Here's an email, a very thoughtful email from Bill, who says, where does a person stand who is battling addiction, whether with drugs, alcohol, porn, or other sex addictions, anything of this sort? They know they're an addict and these behaviors are wrong. They participate in weekly Mass and the sacraments of the Church, like weekly reconciliation before the Eucharist. Is it reasonable to believe he or she is choosing such behaviors with a full act of the will? Therefore, would such a person go to hell if he dies after committing one of these grave sins and honestly praying the act of contrition, but before going to reconciliation? Thanks, Bill.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate the question. Fortunately, we're not in the job of passing judgment on people's souls before the throne of God. That's up to God to do, all right? Yeah. So I think we can't advise people both on the morality and the psychology of addiction. And I'm not an expert in the subject. There are people out there who are. But let me give you what I've sort of come to on my own. Some people just flat out choose to abuse substances in a very selfish kind of way, a decision for which they're morally culpable. Now, they may, once they begin, get further and further into it, find that the deeper they go into sin, the less and less freedom they have. Now, that's actually the Catholic doctrine on sin, that sin is a kind of slavery and a bondage, and it gets a hold of you, and sometimes you get so deep in, you really can't get yourself out. And always really, without the grace of God, you're not going to build yourself out. So it always has that pattern. Now, other people fall into addiction in ways that I won't say they're innocent, but are far more naive. Many people experiment with drugs or alcohol for the first time in adolescence because of peer pressure, quite honestly, and that's also a weakness, but one that's kind of mild. I mean, to want to have the desire for your friendship and approval of your friends and so forth. It's culpable, but it's not that culpable. And they may innocently do this thing and not even understand how harmful it is. And then if they have an addictive personality or have the genetic disposition, the next thing you know, boom, they're an addict. And they certainly didn't choose to dive into that. They may be struggling for a lifetime. So pastorally, we would approach such people with deep compassion, loving them and encouraging them and really taking seriously how difficult it is to get out of that rut. At the same time, we're all kind of all in that rut. We're all in the rut of being plowed under by our own sinful habits and our pathologies and our neuroticisms and childhood wounds and so forth. And the temptation is always to palliate those wounds in sinful ways with illicit pleasures of some kind or another. Maybe it's not a substance abuse. Maybe I'm going to palliate that wound by pouring myself into professional accomplishment and try to win honors. Right? Mm-hmm. Well, that's the pride of life that the Scriptures warn about. Maybe I'm going to try to plow myself into my job, make a bunch of money, and build a big fancy house. That's the lust of the eyes. Maybe I'm going to try to chase all the best-looking women in high school. That's the lust of the flesh, right? Those may or may not be addictions per se, but they all follow the same pattern. And we're all stuck in that rut. None of us are going to get out of this rut without grace.
Right.
And one thing you can't do is you're not going to be able to pull yourself up by your own moral bootstraps. And I think I can out of that problem. And we know that from addiction, but we know it from our own life of sin. I mean, how many priests hear the same confession from the same person every week, week after week after week for years and years and years? And I do think, talking about addiction, that the key to the 12 steps, which have proved effective for many people to get out of the addiction, is the recognition that I can't do this thing. I'm licked. I'm beat. This thing's got me, I'm out for the count. Mm-hmm. I need, the 12-step people say, a higher power, but we know who that is.
Yes, we do.
We know who that is. I need God to come down here and fix this for me. But I'm not passive. I'm going to make a searching moral inventory. I'm going to really be brutally honest about my faults. Now, look, that's a lifetime process. It doesn't happen overnight. Then I'm going to be willing for God to take away those faults. That's the kicker right there. That's the hard part. Now, I may or may not be morally responsible for my genetic predisposition or ignorant mistakes I made when I was 13 or whatever. I mean, those things are long gone. But I can do that. I've got that much freedom of will. Mm-hmm. I can say, God, I need your help. And I know what I need help with. This, and this.
Yes.
Go get yourself in a 12-step support group. Go develop a good confessional life and the sacrament of reconciliation. Use those means that are available to you. Use those means, right? And you can do that much.
Absolutely. Bill, thanks so much for your email. Thanks to everyone who sends emails to us. If you would like to send one for a future show, the address ctc@ewtn.com. ctc@ewtn.com. If you're ready now, let's go to the phones at 833-288-EWTN. We're going to begin this time with JC in Portland, Oregon, listening on the great Mater Dei Radio. Hey, JC, what's on your mind today?
Hello. Yes, my mother was Catholic, and I was raised Catholic. My father was not. Mom always said, if he is dying and if he hasn't been baptized and there's no priest close enough, get whatever water is available and make the sign of the cross on his head with the water and say, I baptize you in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost. My husband's not Catholic, and I was wondering if I ever got in that situation, does that work? Is that
okay? Yeah,
is
thank
that
you.
A thing?
Well, let me ask you a question. you said your husband is not Catholic. Is he some kind of Christian?
He was baptized Catholic. He got all the sacraments, but he...
Okay. In that case, you cannot rebaptize him. He's been baptized. We only get baptized once. That's it. One and done. No more baptisms for him. Now, so what you want to... I hope he comes back to church. Like, that's really what... I don't want to put this thing off till he's on his last breath, you understand. I'd like him to come back today. But let's say you've got a Catholic who's been away from the church for some time, and it looks like they're in their final days. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is make an appeal to this individual. Hey, can I send for the priest? Looks like you're not going to be with us a lot longer. Can I send for the priest? He can give you last rites. It really would be a good idea. That's what you want to do. Now, let's say that he's hemmed and hawed about it. Well, maybe, but not today. Well, and you get a lot of that. I've been around the nursing homes with the old people that aren't far from death. Miss Smith, you want to go to confession? Not today. Not today. And but they don't realize they're going to be dead next Tuesday. Mm-hmm. All right. If he's made some kind of inclination that he would be willing, some kind of willingness there on his part, in the future even, to receive the sacrament, that much of an inclination on his part, that much receptivity is enough that if he lapses into unconsciousness, the priest can still come and anoint and absolve him, and if he revives a certain extent, give him viaticum and get those last rites in. So that's what you're aiming for, not baptism, but those last rites. And even if he's unconscious, you can still do something for him if there's any kind of suggestion that he's got an inclination to be receptive to it.
Okay. And JC, thanks so much for your call. Hope that's helpful for you. And that opens up a line for you right now at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Call to communion in progress here on EWTN. Let's go to Carrie now in Des Moines, listening on YouTube, a first-time caller. Hey, Carrie, what's on your mind today?
Hello, good afternoon, guys. I was just calling in to ask a question about natural family planning. I'm kind of been researching some different possibilities with that, but I guess I feel like I've been getting conflicting information when it's okay to practice NFP as far as needing like a grave reason. I don't know. I guess.
Okay, thanks. Let me ask you a question. You're struggling with whether or not it's, as opposed to NFP, whether you should just make no provision for family planning at all. Are those your alternatives? Just throw the whole thing up in the wind and let happen what happens, or practice NFP? Is that your dilemma right now?
Right, practicing NFP to avoid pregnancy, and if I have a just reason or if it's a grave reason to be able to do so.
Okay, I got you. Now look, I don't know your situation. But I know the cultural situation. And my personal opinion, I think just about every Catholic in North America has got a sufficient reason to practice NFP. I don't think we're not obligated to just take as many kids as God can give us. Now, I know a few families that are just tremendously gifted in the parenthood domain, and they have the emotional, psychological, spiritual, and financial resources to welcome families of 8, 9, 10, 11 kids. That is rare. Very, very rare today, I believe, for a couple of reasons. One, we're not living on the farm anymore.
That's true.
And what used to be a financial asset to a family is now a very, very great responsibility that weighs on parents in ways that are much more than just financial. So that's one reason. Another reason is that we ourselves, as parents in this generation, are deeply wounded people who may not ourselves have grown up in very strongly faithful, functional, virtuous, sound, reasonable households. And we're dealing with just mountains of emotional wounds and immaturity that we haven't worked out ourselves as adults. And I've known a lot of young Catholics who are very ideological about their faith, and they really want to be super Catholics, and they bite off a lot more than they can chew in terms of taking on responsibilities that they're really not equipped to carry. And the people who are going to end up bearing the brunt of that are the 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 18-year-old kids down the line. And I've just seen it over and over and over again. And I would say you really need to focus not just on having as many kids as possible, but on trying to live a healthy, sound, psychologically balanced, sustainable, holy Catholic marriage first, right? And then you understand that you can bring kids up in the kind of sound, stable, warm, supportive, loving home that'll enable them to thrive. And just having the right religious ideology is not going to make that happen. You got to work on your own life of virtue. That's my humble opinion.
Carrie, thank you so much for your call. And there are some great resources out there. You can start by going to EWTN.com and clicking on pro-life. We've got a lot of stuff for you. So does Catholic Answers. That would be Catholic.com. Some great resources. Thank you so much for your call. When we return, we'll be talking with Kathy in Fargo, North Dakota, listening on the great Real Presence Radio. We have a line open for you right now. If you have a question for Dr. David Anders, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Call to Communion in progress here on EWTN. Do stay with us.
Teresa Tomeo.
It's our goal to help each and every listener take this beautiful faith of ours out into the public square with great ideas on making a difference through engaging the culture.
The leading Catholic voices are on EWTN Radio.
Check out EWTN's official YouTube channel. Just follow the link on our homepage at EWTN.com or go to YouTube.com/EWTN.
Watch EWTN's live shows or today's homily from the Daily Mass.
Click the upload button to see our most recent clips.
You can also find all of EWTN YouTube content by clicking the playlist button.
It's all on the official EWTN YouTube channel at YouTube.com/EWTN.
Visit today.
60 Seconds with Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen.
It must be understood at the beginning that the Eucharist may be considered either from the point of view of a sacrament or from the point of view of a sacrifice. In order to understand this distinction, because it is rather a technical one, we go back to the analogy of nature. Every day of your life, you partake of certain food, the products of wheat, vegetables, fish, meat. They all enter into the sustenance of your life. They nourish you, they feed you. But have you ever thought of this other side? Before they can ever nourish you, they must be submitted to some kind of sacrifice. Before they can be the sacrament of your physical life, they must die or be sacrificed.
The people you know and trust are on EWTN.
We're unscripted on tomorrow's Take Two with Jerry and Debbie.
Call and share or ask anything you'd like with us at noon Eastern.
Now back to more of Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders.
Glad you're with us here on Call to Communion here on EWTN. Our phone number 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. We're going to get to Kathy in Fargo in just a moment. First, a quick text here from Maria who says, is it a sin to be upset, or actually mostly sad, at my husband for not wanting to pray or go to Mass with me?
Wow. First of all, I'm really sorry for your dilemma. And I'm sympathetic, and that's painful. So no, it's not a sin for you to be sad. It's not a sin, because you ought to, it's right that you should want to share your Catholic faith with the person with whom you're most intimate in the world. Because it
actually says to continue with this, I should have read the whole thing. She says, I'm confused. He was a Baptist and then converted to Catholicism. I feel obligated to stay with him because of his conversion, but he seems very cold, spiritually speaking. That's the remainder of it.
Yeah. So no, you're not wrong to feel that there's a loss here and unfulfilled expectations. I think that's reasonable for you to feel that way. Now, the question is, how are we going to deal with it? And you're not the first wife in the history of the world to have a languid, slothful husband who does not want to go to Mass. You'd be not the first. And there are some great saints who have been in this position. One comes to mind, of course, Rita of Cascia.
Yes.
Is kind of she's the
poster girl.
The poster girl, the grandmama of all these women. And you know, her fidelity to her faith ultimately won her husband. Now, that's not a promise, right? You can live your whole life and be faithful to the church and never win your husband. So it's not a guarantee that'll happen. But what's the alternative? I mean, you're not going to be bad in your own practice, and you're going to. St. Paul tells us that the unbelieving spouse can be sanctified through the believing spouse. Doesn't mean it'll get them to heaven, but it means that God's grace can flow into your home and into your marriage and work on him in unseen ways because of your fidelity to your vocation, right? But I also think that at the human element, it probably means y'all need to really dig down deep and do some good communicating. And there's a wound here. And it's not unrelated to your own communication, right? And because he maybe gave you some false expectations, some false promises. And that sense of betrayal, if that's lying there, that's a relational issue that's really profound. And I would caution you against using the question of the faith and church attendance as a kind of cudgel or maybe a symbol to mask underlying relational problems in communication that are really the root of the thing, right? And so it might be a good idea, in addition to continuing the practice of your own faith, to maybe find a good Catholic family counselor and sit down and have a conversation with a third party. And I bet a whole bunch of stuff will come out other than just whether or not we're going to Mass together.
Mm-hmm. As you were sharing all this, David, it made me think of a couple that I know, and it's almost exactly the same here as Maria's case. The husband converted to Catholicism, and all was fine for maybe a year, and then he just went, and then just stopped going. And her answer was to just say, oh, well. But that's not a good answer either.
No, oh, well, no. I mean, like, so we have to keep the lines of communication open.
Yes.
And in fact, the secular research on relationships, if I've read it correctly, suggests that particularly husbands, when husbands emotionally withdraw from a relationship, that's one of the most devastating things. And it's tough because, like, I'm a guy, I get this. It's tough to get guys to actually tell you how they're feeling in the moment and honestly, without bringing anger or guilt or manipulation into it. Mm-hmm. But to be conscious that that's a goal. Right, we need to learn how to communicate openly and honestly, appreciate one another's opinions, and deal with these underlying issues. When what we really want to do is we're trying to be passive aggressive, set up some sort of litmus test. You better do this for me. You better do that for me, and then we shut down and walk away with our feelings hurt, and go to our separate rooms and our little hobbies to stay away from the pain that we're causing each other.
Sure.
And it's hard work. It's hard work, and you gotta keep at it.
Every day. All right, Maria, we hope that's helpful for you, and please know that we'll be praying for you and your husband. Call to communion here on EWTN. Our phone number 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. All right, as promised, the very patient Kathy in Fargo, listening on Real Presence Radio. Hey, Kathy, what's on your mind today?
Hello, thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I am looking for some recommendations that you maybe might have for a young teenager questioning her faith and staying away from confirmation classes because she's just not sure that's what she wants. And I'm just wondering if there are any books or resources you could recommend.
Yep, I sure can. Thank you very much. Appreciate the question. So the book for you is by Dr. Peter Kreeft, Kreeft. Title of the book is Because God is Real, 16 Questions and One Answer. He wrote this book. Dr. Kreeft, of course, is a very well-known Catholic philosopher, teaches at Boston College, and has made a career out of writing popular apologetics and philosophy to make that available to a wide audience. And this book he wrote specifically for kids that are around confirmation age, who may be wrestling with their faith and the reasons for their faith. So Dr. Peter Kreeft, Because God is Real. That's where I would go. Also, I think there are just a a world of visual resources, audiovisual resources that are also very accessible. A lot of the stuff that Bishop Robert Barron has produced through Word on Fire. He's Father. He used to be Father Barron. Bishop Barron is very engaged in popular culture. He's a student of popular culture, and so he'll comment on the latest superhero movie, that kind of stuff, and bring in the relevance of the Catholic faith to all these cultural issues. And in that way, he's been able to reach an awful lot of people who would not sit down and read a book by Dr. Peter Kreeft, but they might listen, hey, what's this bishop have to say about the newest, Marvel superhero movie? And that's an avenue as well. And things like that are also helpful.
You are so right about being plugged into the pop culture. I mean, I remember when he actually went to Facebook, went to the physical headquarters of Facebook, and just wanted to chat with the people there. I thought, man, oh man.
Yeah. He's all about engaging the culture with the claims of the gospel. And he does it in a very ironic, non-combative way, which is so attractive.
There you go, Kathy. Thank you so much for your call. It's Call to Communion here on EWTN. Our phone number is 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Or you can text the letters EWTN to 55000. Rita just texted us. She says, what are your thoughts on this pandemic for those who are struggling, like myself, to have faith, while at the same time being told to read the book of Revelation and see that the end is near?
Oh, I absolutely think you should not read the book of Revelation seeing the end is nigh. All right, I think you should read the book of Revelation the way the Catholic Church has always read the book of Revelation, which is to say that it is an apocalyptic, and that's a genre of literature, right? It's a genre of literature. It's an apocalyptic, meaning uses lots of symbolic imagery and metaphor, description of the state of the church in every age. We are always in a life and death struggle with the forces of good and evil, with Christ and Satan battling for our souls. It takes place not only at the level of our interior life, but it also takes place at the level of powers and principalities and in government and media, all this kind of thing, popular entertainment. There's always a struggle there, and there are those that would like to destroy the gospel and destroy the face of the church. And so, St. John says that many antichrists have come. Many antichrists have come. Dietrich von Hildebrand, who was one of the greatest Catholic philosophers of the 20th century, and beloved by several of the popes, in fact, right? John Paul II thought he was the greatest. Paul VI thought an awful lot of him as well. And von Hildebrand was a great opponent of Hitler. And his book, My Battle Against Hitler, I strongly recommend to people. And, of course, he never hesitated to call Hitler the Antichrist. Now, he didn't think Hitler was like the historical Antichrist, like there was just one. But that the spirit of, I am against Christ, that attitude was very much characteristic of his whole regime. And it's the kind of thing we would see represented in the book of Revelation. Well, the church has always been up against these kinds of forces. And whether it would be in Nazi Germany, whether it would be in Soviet Russia, the Rwandan genocide, or the conquest of the church in North Africa in the early Middle Ages by the advance of Islam, or you name it. I mean, there's always some kind of cataclysm around the corner, and the church has lived through cycles of these things for centuries and centuries and centuries. But our Lord himself says, no one knows the day or the hour. So all of us are going to confront these kinds of challenges at one time or another in either our life or parents' lives or our children's lives. And so we always have to put on the full armor of God and be prepared. But, it's not time to empty the bank account and dig a hole in the side of the hill.
Right. Okay. And Rita, thank you so much for your call. Let's go now to Don in Cumming, Georgia, listening on our great station there, The Quest. Hey, Don, what's on your mind today?
Well, I'm charging my phone in a minute, but I just was listening, and I liked the show. I've been listening to it quite a bit from the Quest Radio, but the comments that were just coming out about natural family planning, and that too many people can't handle a big family. I just thought the way that was framed was a little dangerous. I just didn't really appreciate that.
Okay, well, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to offend anybody. What did you find dangerous about it?
Well, it just, you were saying that when, a family has 8 or 9 kids, they have to be emotionally equipped and they have to be able to, do all these things. But a lot of times a family that has 2 kids, one of those kids could easily commit suicide or have any other problems. And it might even be more so in that case. The families that I know that have 7, 8, 9 kids are, the kids are pretty happy and, there's problems. But, I don't think you contradicted church teaching at all in saying that, we are, anybody can limit the size of their family for good reasons. And, but you also have to be open to God's will. And maybe, it seemed like to me that you were saying maybe if you got to 6 kids, you would just be, abnormal almost. It just was coming across wrong to me.
Okay,
That's
thanks.
all.
Well, I really appreciate the corrective. So let me reframe, all right, and try to respond to what you said in a sensitive way. So the question that prompted my answer was a woman wanted to know if she had sufficient reason to practice natural family planning. That was really what prompted the question.
Right.
And that's got to be an individualistic, not individualistic, but individual and prudential choice. And there cannot be a single hard and fast rule that applies in every case because everybody's situation is different. And, if you're, I have met people who can get quite scrupulous on this question, right? And they can second guess themselves all the time and create a lot of guilt and anxiety. And so my intent is to be gentle with people and not set up the goal of a very large family for them as a kind of expectation that this is what they need to attain holiness. And if they feel like they have a decent reason to space the birth of their children in a morally acceptable way, that they be at liberty to do that and not be laboring under an ideological commitment that, good Catholic families have to have 8 or 9 kids. And I've seen that. I've seen people, and not just the children question, but, all religious people, all people, have an ideal in our head of what we think, outwardly what perfection might look like, whether in the religious sphere or the political sphere or the economic sphere. And if we set up those kinds of expectations, sometimes we may not be attending to where the real battle of the spiritual life lies, which may not be in the question of do I have 8 or 9 kids, but do I have the moral resources to be kind to even one of them? And I'm speaking from experience here, right? I didn't get into this in the call before, but, we went to the break and Tom and I kind of chatted about this. I got married when I was 21. I'm glad I did, right? I love my wife, love my children. I can guarantee I wasn't emotionally ready for it. I guarantee I wouldn't go read my book, The Catholic Church Saved My Marriage, and you can read about some of the torment that I went through. And I had this experience of having an image in my mind of sort of the ideal Christian family, just pumping out babies right and left. And I've got 5 kids, and I'm happy I do. But they came one after another in quick succession, and I naively thought that, my knowledge of the gospel and scripture and church history would be sufficient for the arduous job of being a Christian parent. What I found out is actually that's very little value. What matters is a life of virtue. And that's what I hadn't bothered to cultivate. And first because I grew up in a tradition that didn't teach virtue, but also because I didn't have the moral resources to do it in my own life. And I suffered, and my children suffered, and my wife suffered because of my own lack of virtue. And so that's really where I think the emphasis needs to lie. And there's a great Catholic family writer, James Stinson, Father Protector is one of his books, and he has others, who talks about this dynamic, that the really successful Catholic families, it's not a matter of how many kids, more or less. It's a question of what are the parents building into the lives of the children? Are they building in an adventurous sense of life as a cooperative project, in the virtues, as we're building good things together for our own sake and for the sake of our neighbor in the kingdom of God? And that's really I think where the emphasis has to lie. And when we're spontaneously and joyfully living the Christian life with openness and trust, God will give us the number of children we need. But let's not set up an ideological standard and then fail to attend to the real moral needs that I may have with even one kid. That's
Sure.
just the point I'm trying to make.
Don, appreciate your call. We really are very appreciative that you called back, and so we could provide a little more clarification there for you. Call to Communion here on EWTN. Let's go now to Sean. Sean's listening in Des Moines on Iowa Catholic Radio. Hey, Sean, what's on your mind today?
Hi. Hey, Dr. Anders. I love your work. I love watching your stuff, and I've been watching you on YouTube a lot recently. I just wanted to say I'm a big fan.
Thank you.
So I'm a Protestant in transition, and so I'm just kind of doing the termite inspection right now before I buy into the whole thing.
Sure.
So one question that I have is, I know from reading Luther, Zwingli, and Calvin they had their differences on their opinion of what happens in the Eucharist. One thing they were united on is that it was not a sacrifice. And so that really seems to be where the battle line is drawn between Catholics and Protestants. What is the earliest attestation to the Eucharist being a sacrifice?
Okay, thanks. All right. So at first I thought you were going to ask for patristic citations, and I was getting my mind all ready to start quoting, right? Then when you say earliest, then I've got to pick one out and go, that's the first attestation. I'll have to think on earliest for a minute. Although really, I guess I'd have to say the earliest citation is going to be in the Gospels and the letters of St. Paul. That's really the earliest, right? Christ himself uses the language of sacrifice in the rite of institution. And you're a good Protestant. You've read the Scriptures. You know when he talks about the blood of the new covenant, it of course recalls our mind immediately to Exodus 24 when Moses says, "This is the blood of the covenant," and kills the animal and sprinkles it on the people. So Christ is using that biblical language of sacrifice. The language of given for you and offered for you is, of course, the language of oblation. And the words of sacrifice are used there in the Greek text. Even the language of memorial recalls the memorial offerings of the Old Covenant. And so that's kind of packed into the language of the words of institution itself. And then St. Paul, who analogizes the Eucharist to pagan sacrifice in 1 Corinthians when he says that you can't partake of the table of the Lord and the table of demons. The comparison is unintelligible apart from an understanding of the sacrificial nature of the rite. And then I would ask you, as you're doing your study, right, to this is what first came to my mind. Look at the anaphora, that's the Eucharistic prayer, in the earliest extant Christian liturgies of Hippolytus or of the Didache or of the anaphora of St. James or the Roman canon. And these, of course, these liturgies are handed down by apostolic tradition from the very earliest times. And you'll find the language of oblation and offering is absolutely ubiquitous. You cannot get away from it. And they're replete with prayers to God to accept this pure oblation, right? So it's all through the literature, and that's why I'm having such a hard time settling on just one. Now, let me back up and talk a little bit about the theology of the thing, because I think that this can be helpful. Protestants obviously have stumbled over this doctrine for a very long time, beginning with Luther. And I think attending to Luther's reasons would be significant, right? So Luther lived in a very different cultural moment from the one that we live in, and he lived in a very different liturgical environment from the one that we lived in. And beginning with, say, around the Carolingian era, there was a progressive separation of the spirituality of the laity from the actual rite of the Mass. And some of that had to do with linguistic features, right? Because as Latin became less and less of the lingua franca and more a liturgical and ecclesiastical language remote from the people, and of course the language of the liturgy itself didn't change, but the people's language did change, it became more difficult for them to immediately enter into the meaning and significance of the act. And so what happened in terms of the history of devotion by the late Middle Ages is you began to have the development of sort of parallel liturgies, if you will. There was the clerical liturgy that would take place behind the rood screen on the high altars of places like Notre Dame. And then you had the devotional practices of the lay faithful. And so the lay faithful would come into Mass, they'd go into the church building, but they might be praying their their rosaries or something like that while the priest is doing his thing, and you really kind of have parallel situations going on. And in those lay liturgies, in those lay devotions, sometimes they began to be practiced sort of outside the liturgy of the Mass. So you would have confraternities that would gather to pray devotional prayers. Sometimes the leaders of the confraternity would actually wear vestments and engage in what looked like sort of quasi-liturgical practices.
Really?
Yeah, exactly. And it's that sort of lay voluntaristic ethos that actually helped produce some of the theology of the Protestant Reformation. But we're not in that cultural moment right now, and nor were the Church Fathers. So what do we mean by Eucharistic sacrifice? That's really the key issue. And the Reformers' contention that we are sacrificing Jesus over again, right? Nonsense. The Church's dogma, and you can read the Council of Trent on this, is that the bloody sacrifice of Christ occurred only once. The bloody sacrifice of Christ occurred only once at a distinct historical moment. Done. Finished and sufficient. What we do in the Eucharist today is an unbloody sacrifice in which Christ is not immolated. He's not killed. He's not destroyed, right, as his body was on the cross. It is an unbloody sacrifice. It is the glorified Jesus in heaven, who is made present in the altar by transubstantiation through the words of institution. And it is that Christ who is being offered in an unbloody manner to God, right? It's the same priest who offers it, Jesus. It's the same victim, once in a bloody manner, now in an unbloody manner, and for the same intent, namely to make reparation for sin, reconcile us to God, and so forth. But the manner of the offering is entirely different. Now, some Protestants say, well, if Christ died once for all, well, why have any sacrifice at all? But to offer sacrifice is the very essence of the virtue of religion. St. Paul teaches that very doctrine in Romans chapter 12 when he says, offer your bodies as living sacrifices. This is your spiritual act of worship. Right? So the death of Christ does not obviate, does not eliminate the need for sacrifice. Right? The Scripture says so. Like, you can't live a worshipful life to God if you're unwilling to make sacrifices to Him. Imagine telling your wife, like, I love you, but I'm not going to make any sacrifices for you. I mean, well, that's not love, right? No. Sacrifice is the language of love. But what Christ has given is a sacrifice of thanksgiving. That's what Eucharist means, as the centerpiece of our act of worship. This is very different from the Protestant idea or practice that we go to church to be recipients of the dissemination of information. Right? The Protestant goes to church to hear a sermon, to have doctrine preached at him passively. The Catholic goes to worship to offer something to God and ourselves along with Him. That's the heart of biblical religion.
Sean, thank you so much for your call. We appreciate that. A quick question here from Nina watching us on YouTube. She says, I'm just now learning about Catholics offering up suffering for the holy souls in purgatory. Can we offer up past sufferings?
No, not in the same way. Not in the same way, because the essence of offering is in the intention, right? And you can offer up present sufferings, and your past sufferings sometimes kind of come back to bite you, if you will. You know, I mean, the memory of a past event can be experienced as a form of suffering, and you can certainly unite that to Christ. But the propitiatory value of the act of sacrifice is in the intention. And if you suffered, like if I broke my leg when I was 5, you know, probably at that time I didn't have the intention of breaking my leg for the sake of God. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But if I'm limping today because of it, sure.
Could be. All right. Thank you so much for checking in with us on YouTube. Nina, thank you for that. And Dr. David Anders, a very fast-moving hour.
Yeah,
thank you, sir.
Yeah. Hey, thank you, Tom.
We do the program right here on EWTN Monday through Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. And we'll repeat that same program at 11 p.m. Eastern with an encore that is the best of Call to Communion. We play that for you on Sundays at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. You can also check out the podcast any time of the day or night by going to EWTNradio.net. On behalf of our fabulous team here, I'm Tom Price along with Dr. David Anders. Thanks for joining us this time here on EWTN's Call to Communion. We'll see you next time. God bless.